Macroevolution is the formation of new species. That's what we'll be talking about in this video. So macroevolution encompasses the major biological changes evident in the fossil record. Macroevolution is the formation of new species. How does this happen? How do we get new species? What even is a species? That's what we'll be talking about in these next few slides here. Now, it turns out that there are two ways in which new species can form. These are known as allopatric speciation or sympatric speciation. And we'll talk about these two categories. Allopatric speciation is when a single population becomes divided or separated by a geographical event, whether it's the formation of a mountain range, the formation of a canyon, the movement of an island offshore. In allopatric speciation, individuals of the same population are separated for a duration of time. Each population, or each half of this divided population, evolves independently based on their environment. And then if at a later time, these individuals are brought back together and they are not able to reproduce with each other, we would say a speciation event has occurred. Conversely, sympatric speciation, there is no geographic barrier, there is no division. Instead, there's just a sudden mutation that results in individuals who are no longer able to reproduce with the initial population, but can in turn make a functional reproducing population themselves. So, allopatric speciation. In allopatric speciation, there is a geological process that can fragment a population into two or more isolated populations. These geological processes could result in allopatric speciation. The example we see in this image here is the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Now, it turns out that there was a population of ground squirrels that was native to the area before the canyon was significantly developed. This population of ground squirrels was one population, but as the canyon development continued, the right and left side of the canyon divided the populations. Or I should say, there was a separate ground squirrel population on either side, each evolving in their own way. So at this point now, if you were to collect ground squirrels on one side of the Grand Canyon and drop them off on the other side, they would not be able to reproduce with the ground squirrels on that other side. They are now technically different species because of their separation. Geographic separation does not always result in speciation, only if there's the formation of a reproductive barrier. So speciation occurs only with the evolution of reproductive barriers between the isolated population and its parent population. If you start with one population and they're temporarily divided by a geographic barrier over many generations, yet if individuals are able to come back together and still reproduce, then we would say no speciation had occurred. However, if after being separated for a while, the individuals are brought back together and they are not able to reproduce, we would then say that they are now separate species. Sympatric speciation doesn't require that geographic barrier. It's usually a sudden mutation event. Sympatric speciation occurs if a genetic change produces a reproductive barrier between mutants and the parent population. Polyploidy is a mechanism of sympatric speciation. Polyploidy is when there are more than two copies of each homologous chromosome. ends up being more common in plants than in animals, but examples can be found in both. So how would this occur? How can polyploidy take place? Well, it could originate from accidents during cell division, and possibly you have a gamete, which has half the number of chromosomes, fertilizing an already diploid cell, and now suddenly the resulting cell is triploid. For some types of organisms, this would be fatal, but occasionally, especially in plants, this type of polyploidy can result in a new species. What can also happen is that there could be hybridization between two different parent plant species that can result in a new offspring that can't reproduce with either original parent, but plants often are self-fertile, and that's why these speciation events are more likely to occur in them, because they can maybe self-fertilize. It turns out that many domesticated plants are the result of sympatric speciation. So how rapidly does this happen? How often does this, or at what rate does speciation occur? Well, traditional evolutionary trees diagram the descent of species as a gradual divergence. So divergence in this case is movement to the left or right, and we see on time scales these changes happen over long periods of time. This was the traditional view of evolution, and we have some evidence that this does occur for some species. However, there's another possible consideration called punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium is a contrasting model of evolution. Punctuated equilibrium states that species most often diverge in spurts of relatively sudden change, followed by periods of stasis, or not having a lot of change. And this punctuated equilibrium could account for the relative scarcity of transitional fossils. These sudden changes could be caused by mutations in genes that regulate development. So what would this divergence diagram look like in punctuated equilibrium? Well, we would see here still change is represented by movement to the left and right, and time is still on the same scale. But these periods of time, when rapid change occurs, we see are much smaller units, followed by periods of stasis. And this could, again, explain the relative scarcity of transitional fossils in the fossil record. So which of these is right? Is it gradual divergence? Is it punctuated equilibrium? It's probably combinations of both, and different species will have different times where there's gradual divergence versus punctuated equilibrium. But you may be wondering, well, how could this happen? How could you have relatively sudden change? I would like to show you a diagram of a specific mutation in fruit flies called antennapedia. For these fruit flies, normally they have antennae on their face, yet because of a small mutation in a developmental gene, these fruit flies now have full-grown legs growing out of their face. Such a drastic change isn't necessarily beneficial for these fruit flies, but it shows how a very small genetic change can result in a very big physical change for that organism. So mutations in developmental genes have possibility to rapidly change the shape or structure of an organism. And this completes our introduction to evolution.